So next up is someone that I've had the pleasure of working with, Mr. Erik Hanchett, developer advocate at AWS Amplify. And it says here, former front-end engineer, but I like to say once a front-end engineer, always a front-end engineer. Fun fact about him, he participated in a NASA Space Apps Challenge hackathon once and created an open ROV command center allowing people to control and debug vehicles remotely. That was pretty cool. I mean, seriously, you work with people in the city and you never know what neat things they have in their backpack. All right, Erik. Oh, hang on. The design. Okay, we were good. Let's go.
Hello. Today we're going to talk about design systems with design tokens and Amplify UI. So let's imagine a scenario where your boss comes to you and he asks you that there's a problem and he needs you to fix it. So let's set this up a little bit. You have multiple different websites, or maybe one website that's fairly large. There's lots of different components to it. You have lots of different styles throughout your application that you have to deal with. You have footers, headers throughout, and each individual page maybe looks a little different. And you want the same look, feel throughout your whole application or multiple websites. And you want to be able to reuse these components everywhere. Well, today I'm going to talk to you about a design system. We're going to define it, and we're going to see if that can solve these problems. And then we'll look at some practical examples of using a design system using Amplify UI, the component framework. So here are some goals. We have what are design systems, what are design tokens. We're going to look at the Amplify UI design system with tokens. And then at the end, we're going to use something called style props and responsive layout. So what is a design system? Can I see a show of hands? Who has used design systems before? OK, quite a few of you. So this might be review. So there's a lot of different definitions of what a design system is, but I like to think of it as a set of reusable standards and components which reinforce a brand's identity. So oftentimes, a design system and a component library are talked about interchangeably. So you might have something like Material UI or Chakra, and you can think of those as a design system, but they don't necessarily are a design system. You can use those as a standalone component library. But for the sake of this talk, we're going to assume when I talk about Amplify UI or Chakra or Material that I'm talking about it in the context of it being a design system. And we'll kind of talk about what makes that possible. Also, one important thing about this definition that I like to emphasize is standards, is that you create standards on how you design your application that you have to use throughout all of it. And that's what really makes it a design system, is these standards. And one last thing is you might write these standards down in something called like a style guide. And that really helps capture the design system requirements. So what are design tokens? So design tokens are the values needed to construct and maintain a design system. But what does that mean? So anything you have like spacing, color, typography, you may consider this part of a design token. Could also be styles, animations. Basically, you can take anything and represent it as data, and this could be a part of your design token. So really, tokens enable a design system to have a single source of truth. They provide a kind of repository for recording and tracking styles and changes. So I've been talking for a couple minutes here, but let me talk to you about who I am. I'm here. I'm Erik. I'm a developer advocate for Amplify. I worked 2 years on this Amplify UI component library that I'm going to show you here in a moment. I'm really proud of it. The team at Amplify worked on it for a long time, many hours. Heather Buckle Bucknell also worked on it, and she helped with these slides, so I want to make sure I give her a shout out too. And she's currently an Amplify engineer on the Amplify UI team. This is the AWS Amplify UI team. So the AWS Amplify UI, we consider this a design system. So what is this? Some of you probably saw me, I was at a booth over there. I've been telling everybody about AWS Amplify. Amplify is a set of tools to make it easier for front-end developers to create full-stack websites and to connect to AWS services. We created this Amplify UI because we found that front-end developers needed an easy way to interact with AWS services. And so Amplify UI ended up being a collection of primitives and components that are accessible, and their work with React. And then we also made sure that we had some of those components connect directly to the cloud, and we call those connected components. I'm not going to get too much into the connected components, but if you have any questions on that, I'll be at the booth later. But what I really want to focus on is how we use Amplify UI as a design system and what it makes it up of. So here's just a quick example of an app I created using design tokens and the Amplify UI component system. So these are cards. We have this primitive called a card. We have a rating. We have some SVGs. And this makes it all up to it. This makes basically our app here. And then we have this is sign in. This would actually go to a connected component to have users log in. So there's really two parts to it. We have a blueprint skeleton. Well, let's take a step back. So when you think of like component frameworks, you're probably thinking of a couple different ones. There's a blueprint, a skeleton component libraries like Radix or Headless UI, where you got some functionality, but you're really meant to put in the styles yourself. And then on the right-hand side, you have this side right here, you have the branded design system, which is more things like Material UI, Chakra, where if you take one of those, if you take that component framework and add it to your application, you kind of know what it looks like out of the box, and it's very branded. And what we try to do at Amplify UI is we're sort of in the middle. You can act and use the component framework almost like it's a blueprint skeleton, override it, but if you want to take it right out of the box, you have this branded solution. Here's a graph I like to show people when they're trying to think about, well, should I add this component framework to my app? So here's an example of like Material UI. If you take Material UI right out of the box, it's going to look okay. It's going to look nice. Maybe if 0 is plain and you have 10 on the right-hand side, maybe it's coming out at 4 or 5, but you're kind of limited. There's almost so many things you can override in one of these frameworks to get the exact look and feel you want. Well, Amplify UI, you can take it out of the box, and it starts off maybe 4 or 5, has some nice branded solution, but you can completely override it to make exactly what you want to get exactly what you need. Is there any Bootstrap users here? Bootstrap 3? This is kind of what I feel like back in the day, everybody had a Bootstrap website. It kind of looked and felt the same between all of them. So you might think that like when you start off with the Bootstrap website, maybe it's a little plain, but you might even be limited on how much you can customize it without, pretty much customizing completely out of the way. And I like to think this as a trash compactor. So you don't want your frameworks you use to limit you on the lower end side, so it comes out of the box, kind of plain, and then on the top side where you're overriding so many things, it becomes a hindrance to your design. And so you kind of get this trash compactor effect where you have problems on both sides, and this is definitely not what you want. So really, what you got to think about is design systems shouldn't limit your creativity. It shouldn't prevent you to do what you need to do to be able to create designs and the user experience that you need for your users. Here's a little meme. Designers trying to create a design idea, but the design system's kind of holding them back. So you don't want this. So this is interesting. Should I create my own design system? So in other words, should you create it from scratch? Like not even bother using these component frameworks? Show of hands, like Do you think you should create it from scratch? Okay, I got a few people who probably think you should. So you get a design system, you get a design system, everybody gets a design system here. Well, I really think it depends. So for example, at AWS, I worked at the Amplify UI team for 2 years, and we created a component framework, but we really had to decide, do we want to use what's already existing out there? But also, AWS in general has lots of different design systems. We have lots of different frameworks we use internally. So you have to ask yourself, do you want to take something that your organization already has and bring it inside your group, your team, or do you want to create something from scratch? And I really think it depends on like how big your organization is. Do they already have a design system team that's doing something, or do they not have anything at all? And then if you're like a smaller startup, medium size, then you have to think of like, maybe I should grab one off the shelf. Maybe I should grab Material or Chakra or Amplify, and just start off a few steps forward because you can save a lot of time. So next question, how do we use design tokens in our design system? All right, so we have a couple tenets we want to make sure we handle. We want them to be reusable and extendable. We want them to be designer friendly. And we want to make sure that our designers who use it will understand it. And if you use Figma, Sketch, you probably are familiar with design tokens. So here's an anatomy of a typical design token. We have this color here. I like to call this the namespace. We have the teal, which is we call it sub-namespace, or the color that we're using here. And then 60, which is the scale or the hue of the color we're using. So it kind of goes namespace, sub-namespace, scale. You can actually make more complicated design tokens. So in this case, we are designing a button, assuming this would be like a button primitive in our framework. So we have a component of variation, which would be primary, tertiary, secondary. We have a hover, which is state, and a border color, which is a property. So here it is in code. So we're using it as an object. We'll have something called border widths. We have a small, medium, and large, and we have some values here. And at the end of the day, these design tokens, when you compile them down, they're just really CSS custom properties. So this is kind of, we represented it in this object in our data, but they end up being just CSS custom properties. And you can also use them for the more advanced examples of like overriding component border buttons, color, width, style, radius. And I just didn't make this up. There is a whole spec that the system UI theme specification out there is what we use with our framework. But it's also used by Stitches, Chakra UI, Evergreen. So this type of standard of creating tokens is widely used through the industry. And you can find out more about it on our website. But how do we add consistency? How do we like add a theme? So I have an example here. We have completely unthemed, and then a theme site on one side. So we're going to create a theme object, and we're going to add theme provider to your app. And we're going to use Amplify, but you can certainly use this with whatever design system you're using. It's going to be kind of similar concepts. So first, I'm going to create something called a summer theme. I'm going to put a name, tokens. By the way, we're all TypeScript aware. We love TypeScript everywhere you go. So we have this theme object. It's typed as a theme, so we know what to put in it. And then in React here, we have a theme provider. We'll surround the whole application by it, and we'll pass in that summer theme that we created. And then we need to define some colors. So we're going to have a summer theme. So we're going to create some greens, some pinks, some browns to kind of come up with that theme. We're going to go back to our code here. We're going to add some colors, these tokens. So we have a 10, so we have kind of a lighter yellow and a darker yellow. And we're just kind of constructing this object for our theme that we're going to use to create our app here. And we can do the same thing with fonts. We have a secondary, primary, tertiary. And then they're also going to have some values associated with like yellows and some reds. So we're still not done yet. We still have a little bit more work to go to kind of make it look like this. We're going to add in components here. So this is the type of component. This is all built with our UI components library, so we have a primitive called components. We're going to have, well, its type of component is a card, excuse me. And then remember the anatomy of design token, component, variation, state, property. So there's a lot of information here, so let's zoom in. We're going to have an outlined for our card. Then we're going to add a border color, and we can actually have tokens that point to other tokens. So this one points to the tertiary color we created earlier. So here's the before, and here would be the after we apply this theme. But we still have more things that we need to do. We don't want to put every single style in this huge theme object, because there's going to be individual components and individual places where we need to do overrides. So how do we do that? So this is a concept we like to call style props. So we have this camel case background color that we can apply. So here's a button primitive, and we can apply basically CSS properties directly onto the components themselves and then assign values. Now you're probably thinking, well, can I just add in a class name or just a style tag and put the values in that way? You're right, you could. But one advantage of doing this is we can put an RGB value, we can put a CSS variable, or we can put the design token themselves directly inside this style prop. Typically, when I'm creating an app, I'll first go through and I'll add in a bunch of these style props in here, like font style, colors, font size, and then later on I'll go refactor it out, or I'll put it into my design tokens, or maybe a style sheet. Here's another example of using our component framework. So we have flex, and you can see here it's not really aligned correctly. So this is the same thing if you add a flex component here, is just doing display flex, by default flex direction row. So it's not really aligned correctly. What we could do is we can add in a gap XL and a line item center, and now we have nice aligned room number there. So what about mobile? So responsive design. All right, so we have breakpoints that we can add directly into our theme object. And we can override those breakpoints. So in this case, we have medium 900. So instead of writing a bunch of media queries, we can have it directly inside our theme object, and with our library, we can change the breakpoints depending on the sizes and do different things. So in this case, I have a web component here. I have 8 a.m. web component, and I have this kind of 2-column layout. And now what I want to do is on smaller screen sizes, I want the 8 a.m. to be above the web components. So we also have a grid component. We put a grid here. We have template columns. So right now, the first column would fit as much as it needs, and then the second column would fit up the rest, as you can see here. But what we can do is we can restructure it as an object, and we can put in breakpoints. So our base would be kind of stacked on top of each other. Each column would take the full space. And then on larger screen sizes, it would go to the 2-column layout. So you can see right here. So this is kind of the power of this type of components. And you can see it here. It's a little small, but on this side here, we have the web components, and then you can see it's on top of it on the other side. So it's stacking. All right, so we've been talking for about 20 minutes, but if you're listening right now and watching, what should you do? Like, what are some things you can do today after learning this information? So first, if you don't have a design system, I like this. Like, you can see inconsistencies everywhere. It's kind of apparent on some sites where there wasn't much thought going into what the design is from front to back. And you get new people coming in, and they don't follow any standards, and you can notice it. So obviously, first thing, if you don't have a design system, think about maybe that's something you may want to add to your app, or at least a style guide. Maybe start with that. So if you do use design tokens, learn the design tokens in your system, and as you are creating your app, can you add those in? Can you start using them? Because you'll notice like sometimes there's design tokens and no one uses them, and they do different ways, and that's kind of a waste of people who've created those. But if there's no tokens, can you add them? Why isn't there any? Is the framework or your design system doesn't take care of it, or do they not have it? Maybe you should add them in. You may also want to look at the consistency of the design system altogether. Is it consistent from front to back? Are you noticing on one page, on the header, it shows it's aligned a different way than the other ways? Or maybe you can just notice these little problems. See if you can take an audit of it yourself, and then put that in the backlog for someone to go in and fix it later, or fix it yourself when you have free time. And then, are you following best practices? Assuming you have a design system, are you following the style guide that you put forth? Are you actually implying it? And then, once again, anything that isn't following a best practice, maybe that's a ticket that should go in and get fixed later on. In summary, we've talked about design tokens. I hope everybody here now is excited about design tokens and using it in your next app. We talked about theming and how you can use theming, and how can you have a consistent design. We looked at style props, and then we also looked at responsive layouts and how you can have your responsive layout used basically in your theme object and use it throughout. So where do you want to find documentation? You can go to uidocs.amplify.aws. I will be at the booth the whole day, ready to answer questions. Though we do have a component library, Amplify is a set of tools. If you guys want to learn more about those set of tools, I'll be there. And I'll talk a little bit later about that today in a little while as well. And then you can find me on Twitter at ErikCH, and find me there. Thanks.